Chisholm Trail Academy seniors. Ain't no Rona gonna stop you from getting your diploma.
Was that supposed to rhyme?
You would think so. Welcome, everybody. Super glad that you're joining us here this morning for Elevate. Welcome home. There's always room for one more. And this morning, I'm joined by Johnny.
Hey.
Tell us a little about yourself.
My name's Johnny, and I have the privilege of joining Michael up here. No, I'm just kidding. I also have some more things going on in life. I have a wife who is very beautiful. She's here in the audience. She is my pride and joy, and whenever someone asks me to talk about myself, I always have to talk about her because she and her love towards me makes me realize how I'm actually kind of worth loving sometimes, and that was something I didn't know before her. So, I'm a youth pastor over at Richardson Seventh-day Adventist Church, and we have some project we're working on together. Did you know?
Yeah, so there's this podcast called Where's God, and I think we can put this up on the screen for those at home that are watching this. You and I, a couple months ago, said, hey, there's people asking in our communities about a term called Theodicy. They didn't know it was termed Theodicy, but it's the idea of finding God in the midst of everyday life and in the midst of sin and evil and all that. So we're a couple episodes in.
Yeah.
4, I think.
I think we have an episode 0, and then we have 1 through 4 after that, so...
It's 5?
5.
Something like that.
Sure.
We invite you to check it out at Where's God Pod on Instagram and Twitter, and then you can find the actual podcast on Spotify and Anchor.
Yes.
We're still waiting for some person around the globe to distribute it somewhere else,
right.
But that's where you can find it. So I invite you to check that out. And we're also going to be furthering this conversation this afternoon at 5 p.m. in a little thing that we call Elevate Overtime. So I think I've got a graphic for that as well. We want to invite you back. This is elevate.org/live. And go ahead and check that out. We're going to be dialoguing further and encouraging everybody on their walk, because we want to dive deeper into what we're talking about this morning. And the topic that we have for today is deep. I can't wait to talk about it. It fits in with this specific day.
It does.
And the way that you can join in with our conversation is we invite you to head on over to slido.com, enter the code 114, and you can ask us questions. So we'll be monitoring that. Probably today, the questions we're going to be answering after the fact, this afternoon. We encourage you to do that. We have loved the questions so far. You can check out the rest of our conversations on our YouTube page as well. So without further ado, let's dive into our conversation this morning.
Let's do it.
The engage question that Emily read just a moment ago. Johnny, what does Sabbath mean to you?
You know, you kind of gave me a heads up on this question, and honestly, my answer to this changes every time I think about it. But the way I've landed on right now, and like I said, this could change by the end of the conversation, is Sabbath is simply unrushed time. And I kind of want to just leave it there. And I think unrushed time is the clearest glimpse that we get right now of what heaven will look like. And I think Sabbath is an intentional call back to creation, but not only that, but a looking forward to just how amazing reality will be.
Wow, I love that. You know, we jumped right into this, and some of you watching at home or listening to this later on might not even know what the term Sabbath means. And in our series today, we've got the overarching topic is you got to try this. It's an invitation into an experiential and experimental relationship with God. And this Sabbath that we're going to be discussing today, I think is one of the ultimate, not the penultimate, maybe the ultimate way that we can experiment and experience a relationship with God.
You like using fancy words, and that makes me happy. So describe what you mean by the penultimate and ultimate. What do you mean there, Michael?
What I mean by that is that Sabbath as an institution, if I can use that word, Sabbath as a time, as it's set apart, is the best way to experience a relationship with God. You can't get any better than Sabbath. It's above and beyond. It's the pinnacle. It's the top of the mountain. Can I use any more synonyms to describe this to you?
I think I understand. Yeah, I appreciate that. You know, sometimes a little slow on the uptake, so, you know, people like me really appreciate that. I think that's beautiful. And, you know, using my wife again as an example, if I were to just see her or spend time with her once a week, for example, on Sabbath, that wouldn't really be that much of a relationship, would it? And I think of how I interact with God too.
Yeah.
And if I'm like, oh, I'll just get through the week, and then on Sabbath, I'll hang out with God.
Yeah.
But is that really a healthy relationship? It seems kind of toxic. Like, I don't eat only on Sabbath and then go through the rest of the week like, I'm going to feast on Sabbath. No, it's a continual, like, journeying, as you said, the apex, the top of the mountain, the ultimate, not the penultimate, experience of worship throughout the week.
And the idea of Sabbath is really particularly special to our denomination, the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And we've got all sorts of beliefs based from the Bible that cause us to practice Sabbath on Saturday, what a whole lot of people would call Saturday. And we're not here this morning to necessarily talk about specific day, although I believe that's 100% important. I think in my conversations with you, you believe that's 100% important.
I do.
But we're taking a little bit of a step back. And I think you've got in our notes today a little thing called Johnny's Quote Corner. And I wonder, you did a little background look into the Hebrew term Shabbat. Can you unpack what Shabbat, the Hebrew term, the original children of Israel, what they would have thought if and when they heard the term Shabbat or Sabbath?
Sure. So Shabbat just literally means stop. So it's like, okay, you're going through the week, you're like, oh, it's Friday, finally, but then stop. You stop, you stop. Full stop, stop, okay? So it's really interesting whenever you see that in the description of creation. Because if God, who at least my presupposition is he's all powerful, he doesn't need to sleep, he doesn't need to rest. So why then after creation would he have this day set aside to rest, to stop? Yeah. And the word also means to desist from labor. But not only that, it actually means keep the Sabbath. So Shabbat means keep the Sabbath. So therefore, when Jesus rested on the seventh day, he Sabbathed on Sabbath. And it's a funny wordplay. I think the original audience would understand what's going on in the Hebrew there.
Because we often don't use Sabbath as a verb.
Yeah.
We use it as a noun, and it generally has an article in the front, the Sabbath. And it's kind of this, that's a thing. We've got to focus on the Sabbath. And the Bible does say, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy and that type of thing. But we're stepping back from that and saying, what does it mean to Sabbath? How have I Sabbathed this week? How is your Sabbathing going? We could go on and on about that. But I want to dive into Scripture, and the first place I want to go as we kind of get into our conversation today is 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 1 through 8. I'm not going to read it, but I'm going to summarize it. Elijah, the prophet's been called by God. He went up on top of a mountain, and God displayed his glory. That's the fire coming down from heaven, burning the altar, the prophets of Baal cutting themselves and yelling, and Elijah poking fun at them that their God's in the bathroom, or maybe he's like in another universe or something like that. And he comes from this mountaintop experience where God has shown up, and God's like, I'm here, I'm present. And Elijah's like, yes, that's fantastic. And then this queen by the name of Jezebel kind of incites some fear into Elijah, and he takes off running. And he's totally gone from mountaintop experience to the valley. And he gets to a point in the valley where he's like, God, literally the only guy here, and the only one serving you. This isn't how things were supposed to go. And I love how Joy Clarkson summarizes this in her tweet. You can go find it later. But she puts it this way. This is your gentle reminder that one time in the Bible, Elijah was like, God, I'm so mad, I want to die. So God said, here's some food. Why don't you have a nap? And so Elijah slept, ate, and decided things weren't so bad. Never underestimate the spiritual power of a nap and a snack.
Amen.
And God provided for him right there in that moment and said, Elijah, this is what you need. You need a little bit of Shabbat. You need a little bit of Sabbath in your life right now to take a step back and to rest.
That's something I've really realized about Sabbath in the past few years, is before I would see it as a checklist. Okay, the commandments, I don't think I murdered anyone. Okay, oh yeah, Sabbath, I remembered it. I went to church. Yeah, I did, There's no evidence. So, remember the Sabbath, we teach it sometimes as go to church, brush your teeth,
Yeah.
wear nice clothes.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Now you've kept Sabbath.
Yeah.
But in reality, it's so much more than that. And I've realized at different phases in my life that Sabbath takes a different form. Like sometimes, and I'm saying this in church, so it feels kind of weird, but sometimes Sabbath to me was not going to church.
Ooh.
Sometimes Sabbath was being in nature. Sometimes Sabbath was spending time with family.
Yeah.
And that includes my 3 pet children and my wife. These different things that we experience throughout the week kind of changes what Sabbath looks like too.
Yeah.
And, we're going to get to it, and maybe I'm jumping ahead, but Sabbath was made for us.
Yes.
We weren't made to fit the specific mold of Sabbath.
Right.
And that's something that is just, like, I'm excited. Like, there's no other way to say it. We've made Sabbath some boring thing, and it's one of the most exciting gifts that God has given us.
Yeah. And it was back in Genesis chapter 2 when God has created the entire world. The 1 through 6 days he's been working, evening and morning. It's this day, there's fish, and there's light, and there's planets, and there's all kinds of great stuff. And he gets down to the end of it. He creates Adam and Eve, and then he says to Adam and Eve, why don't you enjoy a Sabbath with me? And he invites them into a rest that they did not work for. They didn't do anything to deserve that Sabbath rest. In fact, it was probably like, all right, Adam, this is how you prune trees, and Eve, this is how you do some other things. I don't want to stereotype here. We're not going to go down that rabbit hole. But, in my mind, I'd be like, all right, guys, we got to get to work. This is how you take care of the garden and everything else. And God's like, no, I've created you to enjoy rest with me. And the best way that we can do that, the best way that you can have an experimental and experiential relationship with me is through a Sabbath rest that starts right now.
I love that. And, sometimes I think, okay, but can I do that on Sabbath? Because I kind of like that. That's cool. Well, in Isaiah 58, it says that Sabbath is supposed to be a delight.
Yeah.
And that we're supposed to just relish in it.
Yeah.
And, it's really, really interesting because through the Genesis narrative, you see God bless 3 different things. You see him bless humans, be fruitful and multiply. You see him bless the animal kingdom, be fruitful and multiply. And then he blesses a day.
Yeah.
That's whack. When I see that and I see the progression, I'm like, that doesn't, one of these is not like the other.
Right.
And, it's really, really, really beautiful because Sabbath, just like humans and creatures, have the life-giving capacity to procreate, to fill the world with life. Because what kind of life would it be if we only had work?
Yeah.
If we didn't get to rest and be able to experience the relationships and the fruit of our labor. I think God built an intentional rhythm into the universe.
That's right. And if you're a note taker at home and you're writing some points down, point 1 that we would potentially be making this morning is that Sabbath is a confession of a design and a creation by a God who cares. God's the one that instituted it, and he set it up. And I think about how the children of Israel went into bondage in Egypt, and they're serving a taskmaster for 400 years. And God goes in, breaks their chains, and he says, come on out of here. And imagine what those people might have looked like, what they might have felt like, what culture they had been brought up in, and how God took 40 years to heal his people. He said, I got to take you out of Egypt, and then I got to work on you a little bit before we get you to the promised land, to the ultimate rest, what represents the ultimate rest. And he says in Exodus chapter 15, verse 26, he says, I, the Lord, am your healer. And then he begins to lay out, okay, here's some water. Here's how you get some food. It's this thing called manna, which they didn't know what it was. And so manna literally means, what is it? Let's go get some what is it? Or like, whatever you call it. And it was interesting. Because at the end of the week, on Friday, God said, hey, you got to collect a double portion on Friday because there's ain't none coming on Sabbath. God pulled out his southern drawl right there. He said, ain't none coming.
Definitely. That's what happened. Yes.
He says, it's not going to happen. So you got to collect it. There were some people who did and some people who didn't. And those who didn't went hungry. And there were some people that were like, oh, I get it, so I need to prepare for the next day. And they collected a double portion on Sunday or Monday or Tuesday. And the next day they opened it up and it was completely spoiled and rotten. And God, in the beginning of the children of Israel coming out of Exodus, is trying to show them what Sabbath is truly about. And real quickly, he not only gives them a weekly Sabbath that's established in Exodus 20, verses 8 through 10, as we know as the 10 Commandments, and that's doubled in Deuteronomy chapter 5, but he also gives them a 7th year Sabbath in Deuteronomy 15 and Leviticus 25. And that was, okay, let the land rest. let certain debts be alleviated. And then there's even a 49th year Sabbath. So he's doing the cycle of 7 days, 7 years, and then 7 sets of 7 years. And that was the year of Jubilee. And get this, Johnny.
Ooh.
If you had student loans,
I do.
done. Gone. Year of Jubilee.
Tell me more.
Sign me up. Where do I get it? Every debt that was owed went back to, just completely erased. All the land that had been sold to provide for a family went back to the original owner. And God was instilling this cycle of rest in the midst of the culture of the children of Israel.
You know, that really makes sense because I heard from a famous author, Walter Brueggemann, he calls Sabbath an act of resistance.
Ooh.
And I love that, especially in the context of God giving the commandments here,
Yeah.
coming out of, Egypt, coming out of this context where work was the primary thing so much that your spiritual life and your mental life dies because of the physical labor.
Yeah.
And it seems to me like Sabbath is an equalizer.
Okay.
Sabbath is an equalizer of class.
Yeah.
It is an equalizer of, your income, I guess that goes with class, but also your importance throughout life, your relationships, everything is equalized on Sabbath. And just thinking within my own context, coming to church on Sabbath, everyone's chilling in a pew, everyone's waiting to get the word, everyone goes to get haystacks. I don't like haystacks, I'm just going to be honest with you.
This is the last time I invite you to come on the stage then. Because
I get
friend,
that, but it was worth it. It was worth it to say that. So, I just love how God goes out of his way to make sure that other people are seen in the same way, like a mutual respect for other people, where it wasn't there before the Sabbath.
Absolutely. That is just absolutely incredible. And we've talked even recently about how we as pastors Sabbath during COVID-19 and previously. And oftentimes for pastors, and people will joke about it, that we only work 1 day a week. Well, it's true. We also work the rest of the days of the week, more often than not. But when it comes to Sabbath, it seems like we're especially energetic, especially bringing our A game, because that's the day that we open the church, we welcome people in.
Yeah.
Pre-COVID, of course. Got to see what that looks like after COVID and all that. But it's been a day for us that we've been the one that's facilitating worship for everybody else.
Yeah.
And then we've had to ask ourselves the questions, how do we as pastors enter into Sabbath rest in the way that God has ordained?
Yeah, and, just being honest with you, I feel like sometimes our system is broken in that regard because I haven't felt rest in the sense that we're talking about, of being able to just breathe in life, to be able to breathe in relationships and breathe in God until a pandemic hit. And it really makes me challenge my priorities. Yeah. Because is it the most important that I go to every service, that I do every Sabbath school, that I do every after-church program, that I do every evening phone call and game night? Yeah. Is it worth the cost of not being able to come to God on Sabbath? What kind of date day would it be if I spend time with everyone else but the person that the date day is set around?
Wow. And as those of you taking notes, if you're a 3-point person, our second point that we're hinting at here is that Sabbath allows for order and structure in a world of chaos. So that there's something, this idea that I can step back a little bit. It orders my life. God established it for the children of Israel. He said weekly Sabbath, 7-year Sabbath, 7 sets of 7 years Sabbath. He brought order into their lives in a world that was completely messed up and chaotic.
That's a lot of Sabbaths, by the way.
It is.
Like, let's acknowledge that's a lot of Sabbaths.
Isn't it glorious? Yeah. And so as we've looked at the Old Testament example of Sabbath, and we could exhaust this, go to Isaiah 58 and all kinds of other stuff, which I recommend. If you have not read Isaiah 58 in its entirety, I recommend that you do it, because it brings together social justice and Sabbath.
Yes.
And particularly in the climate that we live, of recent events, of the murder of a person of color, out totally uncalled for, as Seventh-day Adventists, Sabbaths require us to talk about social justice.
Look, I know we have an agenda in terms of, what we wrote out, but can we stop and dwell on this?
Let's do it.
Because this makes me furious. How dare we call ourselves Sabbath keepers and then not help people that are in need?
Yeah.
How dare we say we're keeping the Sabbath by not going into the water, by not playing video games? That's not keeping Sabbath. That's a list of knots. Sabbath is a list of things we should be doing. Yeah. Listen, can I stand up? I'm upset. I'm upset. We have failed on keeping the Sabbath by the way we've been keeping it.
Yeah.
You know, me as a white male, I am so disappointed with my own race's treatment towards people.
Yeah.
We need to stand up. If we are silent as white males and allow this injustice to continue, it will continue. But I want to use my platform here to say that proper Sabbath keeping is looking out for those who can't look out for themselves, those that have the system bent against them and towards them. This is the proper Sabbath keeping. You know, we weren't talking about not going into Isaiah 58, but this is exactly what Isaiah 58 talks about.
Yeah.
God says, if you break the chains of those who are in bondage, if you do all these things, take care of all this injustice, then my light will pour out upon you and my name will be glorified. I think we hinder ourselves so much by keeping such a small view of Sabbath and by extension, a small view of what God can do in our community. Because taking care of social justice and taking that and putting it at the forefront of our message and our actions, that is evangelism.
Absolutely. And we, in practicing Sabbath well, kind of shake it out a little bit. In practicing Sabbath well, we should be providing rest for other people.
Yes.
And that's what social justice is.
Yes.
That's me as a white male stepping up for every other person that's looked down upon because of their origin, which is awful. We're all human. We all bleed red, right? And we need to be providing rest for people in ways that they're not able to access it because of the system, because of whatever. And true Sabbath keeping is me putting my pleasures aside.
Yeah.
That's what Isaiah 58 says.
Right.
And God says, do my pleasures, and in my pleasures, you're going to find pleasure. And so we kind of laugh at that a little bit and like, no. God invites us into that conversation. He said, can you be my hands and feet and provide rest for other people?
Yeah, no, I was just listening to what you're saying. Yeah, I'm eating that up, man. I had something else I wanted to share. It's kind of diving into the main passage that you had read. Would you actually mind reading it before I dive into
chapter
this?
11, verse 28 through 30. David read it a moment ago. And it says this. This is Jesus speaking, red letters in my Bible. Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon me and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light.
And I just got to read this quote because you know what they say in scholarly works, you're supposed to use a quote if someone says something that you can't say better. Well, this is definitely the case right here.
What are you quoting from?
Yeah, I was about to show. Thank you for prompting me. It's called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. It is a book by John Mark Comer, and he talks about Sabbath in a way that should make us Adventists ashamed at how we keep Sabbath because he keeps it better than we do, and he's not even Adventist. So it's really, really challenging. You know, I'm bringing some pain here today. This is on myself too. So this is what is quoted here. This is by Frederick Dale Bruner. He says this about the verse that we just talked about. A yoke is a work instrument. Thus, when Jesus offers a yoke, he offers what we might think tired workers need least. And that really pops out at me when I hear that verse. I'm like, Jesus, don't give me a yoke, man. I need rest. Give me some pineapple juice, give me a beach, let me just hang out, get sunburnt, whatever comes along with that. I don't need a yoke. So he continues, they need a mattress, not a yoke, kind of like what I just said there. I know, I'm quoting him, not he's quoting me. But Jesus realizes that the most restful gift he can give the tired is a new way to carry life, a fresh way to bear responsibilities. Realism sees that life is a succession of burdens. We cannot get away from them. Thus, instead of offering escape, Jesus offers equipment. Jesus means that obedience to his Sermon on the Mount, which is his yoke, will develop in us a balance and a way of carrying life that will give more rest than the way we have been living. And we always talk about Jesus is the truth. Jesus is the truth. And we present, we have to know these things, we have to know these things. But I think we neglect that Jesus is the way. And that is the process of life. That is the going through the week, because we can have the Sabbath mentality not on the seventh day.
Ooh, I can keep the Sabbath not on the seventh day?
Yes, which, by the way, I didn't ask you. What does Sabbath mean to you, Michael?
Sabbath means to me, we're kind of jumping it back to the engaged question, and we're going to continue the words of Jesus. To me, Sabbath is a space and time set apart that I can commune with God. And I do that through multiple facets. I think coming together as a community and fellowship through church, that's absolutely in line with Sabbath. For some years, our denomination has, I don't think overtly, but has subliminally brought about the idea that keeping the Sabbath, the only way that you can keep the Sabbath is by going to church. If I don't go to church, then I'm not keeping the Sabbath. So I don't agree with that. I think that going to church in the sense that we're gaining community from other people is a part of keeping the Sabbath, but I cannot equate the two. Because in the Bible, Sabbath is all about rest and communion with God and with each other. And it seems to be completely open-ended and completely broad-based for us to decide, okay, God, what's Sabbath for you and me? What's our date look like? And I think that there's significance, and you mentioned at the beginning that God blessed a day. I think there's significance to that day. Johnny, if you were to set up a date with Stephanie, and you said, hey, this coming week, or whenever, let's say May 20.
That's 2 days after our 6-year wedding anniversary.
Okay, so May 18th.
Yeah, that one.
There we go, May 18th. Wow, look at that. May 18th, Stephanie, we're gonna go on a date. Okay, I got it all set up and everything. She looks forward to it, and you get it set up and say, okay, be ready at this time, whatnot. And she's getting all ready and whatnot. You're ready to go out. And on May 18th, say you're going to go out at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, because that's what you do. Say she found you chilling on the couch playing Animal Crossing.
Bro, that's so real.
And she asks you, Johnny, what are you doing? You're like, I'm playing Animal Crossing. She's like, well, what about our date? And you're like, oh, well, I figured we could do that at a different time, that you'd be okay, and she almost like punches you, but holds back a little bit.
How
It's
kind.
a beautiful face.
Oh.
And she says, but Johnny, this date's important to us because it was a day 6 years ago that we got married. And we set aside that we were going to set aside this time to celebrate our love and what God has brought us through. There's significance in times and dates. That's why we celebrate birthdays. That's why we celebrate anniversaries. That's why we celebrate holidays. But for some reason, the weekly holiday, we just kind of push to the side. And we say, God, I'll worry about that later, God. I'm gonna spend time with you later. Today I'm just gonna do my thing. And I imagine how God, as he's established this time for us to weekly come together as a community, but also come and to focus on him and to worship him, how it pains his heart when we turn away from his pleasures on the Sabbath day and we do our own.
Yeah, first of all, I would invite Steph to play Animal Crossing with me. So I think that would salvage some of the date. And second of all, she would actually punch me. But
Okay. Is that true, Steph? Would she?
I would play with him.
Okay,
Yeah,
she'd
thank
play
you.
with you.
Thank
She
you,
didn't
Steph.
say she punched you.
yeah,
So
so that's good. That's the first half, which is the better half. This is kind of jumping a little bit, but to carry on what you're saying, using just a personal story, we just got a puppy. She's like 3 months, almost 3 months, Steph. Yeah, almost 4 months. Yeah, I don't know numbers. Almost 4 months old, and she has legit FOMO, fear of missing out.
Okay.
So
The puppy
whenever
does.
the puppy does,
Yeah.
yeah, not Steph. I'm talking about the puppy, the puppy. So she has like a fear of missing out, and so whenever things are going on around her, she stays awake and she tries to figure out what's going on. Case in point, today I took her to the park. She met another puppy. She had a good time. And she wouldn't go to sleep because she was in the car, and the car is still new. Yeah. So she needed to sleep, but she was sitting there like this and like trying to look around and all these things. Yeah. And so eventually she fell asleep. However, we brought her here as we were coming to church, and she was about to meet some more puppies, which is Stephanie's parents' dogs. And instead of sleeping on the way and getting the rest in the appropriate rhythm of time, she stayed awake because the car's still new. She's excited. And then she gets to see the other puppies, and by then, she's exhausted. Yeah. So I think there's a lesson, at least I learned there, that maybe the rhythm of being sleepy, being tired, we should just stop and rest. And I think one of the biggest reasons we're so exhausted, we're so tired, we feel like we can't hear God all the time, is because we don't know how to sit down with him.
Yeah.
We don't know how to just be. We know how to worship him, and we know what we should do and how to love and how to look like him, but we don't know how to just be with him.
Right. And for those of you, again, taking notes, the last point that we come to today is that a Sabbath lifestyle reminds us that we're not indestructible. We can't just go. We reach a point of burnout. And if we took the time during the week and specifically set aside a day, the seventh day, Sabbath, Saturday, and said, guilt-free, no studying, guilt-free, no work, just enjoy it with God, then we, I think, would come to a place that we would actually be living out what God has called us to live. And as we finish up our conversation this morning, there's another quote by a guy, I think, that I can't pronounce his last name, so I'll let you do it. If you could share, and I think it ties us in as we're wrapping up our conversation this morning.
Sure. So this is by a pastor in Portland. His name is A.J. Swoboda.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure. I might also be butchering that, but you won't know. The Sabbath has largely been forgotten by the church, which has uncritically mimicked the rhythms of the industrial and success-obsessed West. The result? Our road-weary, exhausted churches have largely failed to integrate Sabbath into their lives as vital elements of Christian discipleship. Notice this is a non-Adventist, and I think it rings so true to us, even though we do keep the Sabbath on a weekly basis. It is not as though we do not love God. We love God deeply. We just don't know how to sit with God anymore. We have become perhaps the most emotionally exhausted, psychologically overworked, spiritually malnourished people in history.
So I just resonate with the part of that quote that said, we just do not know how to sit with God anymore. So fast-paced, we've got our phones, got our TVs, we're just living this busy life. We don't know how to take some time and step back and say, God, I'm here, I'm ready to listen, I'm ready to hear.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the essence is all about. So final question, final thoughts as we wrap this up in the next 30 seconds to a minute, Johnny. What does Sabbath keeping look like in 2020? During this time of COVID, what does it look like to you?
In the midst of COVID, just tying this into what you were saying earlier, and then I'll bring it right back. In our podcast, I always go down rabbit holes, but this is going to be a fast one. I lost my train of thought. Anyway, Sabbath in 2020 for me is just being, and I had to fall flat on my face enough times trying to go to realize that I need to stop and embrace the rhythm of life that God has already instituted in my heart, in my energy levels, in everything. And I think Sabbath really speaks this peace, this rest, this sitting with God that we don't understand. And practically, it means turning your phone off. It means spending time with those you love. It means eating extra cookies, anything that makes Sabbath special. It should be a day we look forward to, not a day, I can't do this, I can't do that, can't wait till sunset. What time is sunset again? Oh yeah, then I can start watching my shows. I think we're kind of missing the point, referencing it with a date. If I'm like, okay, Steph, when is our date over? Then I can go do this thing I actually want to do. Then don't even go on the date in the first place. I would actually say don't keep Sabbath if it's hard for you, if it hinders your life, because it's supposed to be a delight.
Yeah. We got to find ways that Sabbath makes our life better.
Yeah.
And invitation to you, listener, and to those of you that are watching this, we want to invite you to try Sabbath. You got to try it. It's come to be one of my favorite days of the week that I look forward to. Friday night, sundown, and it begins with rest. It begins with sleep. And we wake up to a glorious morning. It's kind of raining today or whatnot. But we come to a place that we are able to experience a true relationship with God. And we're able to come to a spot where God and I are sitting down and we're enjoying a relationship with one another. And it's not forced. It's easy. Jesus says, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. And he wants to have that relationship with you. So listener, watcher, try Sabbath and see how it changes your life.